There are 4,218 PS2 games, and I'm beating every one of them. I've got to own the game because I'm playing everything on the original hardware, but I've beefed it up with a RetroTink 5X, some component cables, and more to come soon. Can I do this before I die of old age? I hope so.
Kessen was developed by Koei and was a launch title for the system. Across the board, the game received decent scores and has a 75 on Metacritic. The game is mostly historically accurate and does a great job representing feudal Japan. Can I beat this real-time war game? This video is going to be a bit short, mostly because the game itself was very short, and I only played one of the two campaigns. Because I did reach credits at the end of the first campaign, I may come back to revisit this, but I saw credits and I'm going to count it as beaten. Now, the first thing to know is that I don't know anything about the story, mostly because this takes place in feudal Japan and is mostly historically accurate. There are a couple what-if situations I believe that the creator took, but it doesn't really matter in the end because this is a lot of real-world stuff. The problem is that it kind of wants you to have an idea of what happened during these times in Japan, and I don't. I barely even have an idea of all the things that happened in my own country. But the nice thing is that if you go look in a history book about feudal Japan, then you'll see exactly what the story is about, which is generally just two opposing parties fighting over control for Japan. That is a very brief and unhelpful description, I think, in the end, but at least you understand that there's just two parties and you can play as both of them and try and win the war. The very first party you play as is the one I believe actually does win, and beating the game once allows you to play as the other one to see this kind of what-if scenario. What happens if they win? And that's about all I can say for the story, because don't forget, I said this was pretty short, and a decent amount of that time was taken up by cutscenes and the tutorial battle, which is about 45 minutes in length. So that's a lot of time spent learning how to play and then playing for a very short time. So let me briefly go over how battles work because I am not actually entirely sure. A sad thing about this game is that it doesn't provide enough information to understand all of the systems in the game without you going to do a little bit of research. Even inside the game itself, I had some questions during the stream and I tried to locate that information in an easy to find manner, but there isn't a way to do that. I believe this game probably wants you to do some trial and error, as well as maybe glean information just based off of past battles you've had, and then eventually you can figure out what might be weak to what works best in this situation, but I was never able to do that, as it was about 3.5 to 4 hours long. Before a battle begins, you're allowed to do a couple things to set up the battle, like choosing what generals and what armies go into battle and where they are placed and what they will be doing. Now, not all of this is very obvious, but you get to choose the generals and they get to choose their armies, and you can change things around if you'd like. However, something interesting that happens is that the game says everything is set for you. You don't need to do anything, but you are allowed to change things if you'd like. And so it just kind of gives you a free setup that apparently is about the best you can do. And I don't think it's always the best, but again, I don't know enough information about it, so I assume, well, yeah, this is probably the best setup I can have. One big part of this is choosing the generals and each of the units in their little army, some of which include the footmen, spearmen, bowmen, riflemen, horsemen, lancers, cavalry, and a lot of other little units here and there that all have their own weaknesses and strengths. And again, I'm not sure what those weaknesses and strengths are right off the bat. Some of these are probably common sense, like bowmen are probably good at foot soldiers running at them. They can just snipe them with their bows, or even the riflemen are good against people running at them with weapons and not shooting from a range. But not all of these are very obvious, so it would be more helpful if they had an easy way to tell what's good against what, so that I can make my own armies the way I want, because it would be kind of cool if I had a little bit more customization. There are some options to choose for subterfuge of some sort, where you can get people on the other army to literally leave their army and come over to your side, or just disband and leave you alone entirely, but I'm not sure how that mechanic works. I let the game choose for me, and if it happened, it happened. If it didn't, it didn't. The one thing I had a good choice about was where my armies were placed in every particular battle, and I actually liked doing that because the game gives you what it says is a good setup, and it really isn't, because this game is all about numbers, and I'll get into that when I talk about the gameplay in a minute. But once you get your armies in a good position, you will overwhelm the enemy much quicker than if you let the game choose for you. I was able to move my armies in much better positions where they could support each other better. Okay, on to the actual battles. These are real-time battles where your armies are pitted against each other, and pretty much the goal for each one is to destroy one of the armies that has the commander in it. Now, there are generals leading each of the other small armies. However, those guys will, once destroyed, just leave and you'll have to continue on the battle. So if you can manage to destroy that specific commander, then you will just win the battle. And as far as I can tell, it doesn't matter when you do that, but they don't make it easy. They're pretty much deep into their own territory behind all of the other generals, so you'll have to go through a couple people first, although I'm fairly certain that you can find a strategy to get around that and just go directly for them. When your army battles another army, it's pretty much a numbers game. Whoever has more numbers will probably win. Although, like I said earlier, each unit has strengths and weaknesses, so if you have a few hundred more than the other army, but they are weak to that army, you might lose. Battles are very automated, so you don't have a lot to do when they begin, outside of the fact that you have special abilities for each of the armies, depending on the general. These special abilities can only be used when a commander's zeal is high enough. It has to be at least 80 to use one of your special abilities, and each general can only use a certain special ability a certain number of times. Many of these abilities are ranged abilities, like a barrage that will hit enemies from far away and thin their numbers out before you even get into a battle. You can also support a current fight where your armies are fighting another army, and your guys behind them can fire a barrage into that other army to help them out. There are a number of these ranged attacks that all do different things, but you can also do close range things like a raid that will reduce your enemy's morale, and the lower their morale, the easier it is to win a fight against them. You can also even raise your own zeal or morale through special abilities. Say your commander, who has a way to give your troops a long-range zeal boost, which will give them immediate access to some of their special abilities. You can give orders to your troops and they will most likely follow them, although there is a chance that if they aren't as loyal, they might not follow those orders. It was pretty rare for me to run into one of those situations, and it was never something that lost me a battle. They mostly would just say, no, I'm gonna continue fighting, and then they would have you pull them back if they started to lose, and you'd let them rest and come back into a fight, which is also something you have to pay attention to. Obviously, if your troops are tired, they can't fight, and a lot of times they'll just kind of randomly call out and say, hey, we can't fight, we gotta come back and rest. And you can force them to fight, and if they're loyal, they'll do it, but they won't win battles. So you just let them pull back and rest. And this is why having your armies surround each other and support each other is the best thing you can do. If you just send all of your armies together, any fight they're in will probably be won by you, simply because you can allow one army to come back and rest and another one to step up and take their place. On top of the fact that your special abilities will affect other armies by just simply helping you win battles everywhere by using some barrage or cannons, and it won't make them so tired. Some of these orders that you can also give to your allies are just moving in certain directions and going to certain places, although most of the time I'm just going for the officers and the generals and then eventually the commander, trying to get to him as fast as possible to win the battle, because like I said, numbers win. If you have more armies and more troops, you'll just win the battle. Sometimes in these battles, you'll also get reinforcements, which is kind of odd. Suddenly, a couple more armies of yours will just show up and you'll get to have them join the battle. It'll take them a second to get over to where the fighting is, but it's not that big of a deal. I mean, as long as you can last for 5 minutes, suddenly an extra bunch of armies will come in for you. Now, the enemy has this a few times as well, but again, as long as you are moving quickly, you don't really have a problem with this. It's pretty obvious where those new armies are going to show up, so just have a couple of your armies with cannons just prepare, and the second they show up, use a special ability and thin their numbers out immediately. Often you will not destroy another army outright. They will retreat and try and run away and rest up, and either join another army in battle or just stay out of the picture. And it'll ask you if you want to hunt them down and kill them, and I'm like, yeah, no, I want to fight the commander. That's the one you want to hunt down and kill if they try and run, because that's the goal of the mission. So generally, if they say they're going to run, just let your army rest for a second, and go back into battle with the commander. And this is about the extent of what I did. I sent my armies into battle with people and let them fight. When they said they needed to rest, I let them rest. When they lost, and I let them run away. I just tried to keep all my numbers bolstered up by sending everyone out together. And when someone was losing, pulled one back and put another one in. It always ended up being good for me, but It's also kind of obvious that your side is supposed to win with the numbers you were given. I mean, just in general, all of your armies are mostly bigger, and if their armies are bigger, you just send 2 or 3 of yours at one time at them, and they just can't win. Using your special abilities is an extremely big part of the game, and you'll want to keep your zeal high just to use them, and just use them on armies that are the biggest, and take them out very quickly, especially the commanders. If you can hit the commanders' armies with several cannons and barrages before you even get to them, the fight with them is going to be very simple. Repeat this about 5 or 6 times, and that is the entire game. Excluding the tutorial, of course, because it tries to teach you some stuff, but most of it's just send your guys out and fight. It's really not that hard of a game, although I'm sure the second campaign is, because then you get the army that is the underwhelming one, the one that lost to me the first time. And you get to play them and try and see if you can win. I'm sure that one is much more difficult, although I don't know how much more. Again, since special abilities are so good, as long as you put all of your special ability generals together and just blast armies apart, it doesn't seem like it's going to be that much more difficult. Before I end the video, I will bring up something I did not like, and that's the battlefield itself. It's very difficult to tell what's going on sometimes, and where you need to look to see what's happening. You see, on the screen, your armies aren't very obvious who is who. On the right side, you can scroll through your generals, but it's very difficult to tell who you're looking at and where they are on the battlefield, and sometimes nothing is in order. I feel like I'm just randomly selecting people, hitting special ability, and seeing who they can target, because, I mean, what else am I supposed to do? Everything takes a long time and you sit around waiting a lot, so I just want things to happen as quick as possible. So I use my barrages and my cannons on whoever I'm closest to, and a lot of times I don't even know who's close to who. I just hope for the best. So I do wish that it was easier to tell what was going on, where it was going on, and why it was going on. But it was ambitious for a launch title, so I suppose maybe that was the problem. At the risk of making this video too long, I'm just going to end it here and say that I think this game could have been much better, and I wish that I had been able to learn more about battles and what made battles fun, because honestly, I just sat around doing a lot of waiting, sending my armies into fight, and then using special abilities as often as I possibly could. And then eventually, 4 or 5 hours later, I won and I saw credits. Now obviously, like I said, the other campaign is available, and maybe people would like me to do that campaign to experience more of the game. But when you see credits, that was put there very purposefully. So maybe I'll come back and see what else Kessen has in store. But there is a Kessen 2 and 3, so we'll get to see what advancements they have in this game, hopefully soon. Otherwise, this is game 76 finally completed. Moving on to the next one, 77 afterwards. Thank you so much for watching, everyone. If you've watched this far in the video, I know it's not very long, and maybe I didn't do it as much justice as some people would like, but it was so short, I learned very little about the game. Even going back through the streams, I found myself being confused at what I was seeing. And I don't know if that's partly my fault or partly the game's fault, or a mix of the both. Hey, whatever it is, thank you so much for watching. Thank you to everyone who was in the stream who sat there and watched with me and tried to help me figure things out. And thank you to all the memberships from both Patreon, YouTube, Twitch, everywhere. Thank you guys so much. You're making it much easier to get these games. And I will be back for another video soon. Later.